The story begins not with a dramatic event, but with the quiet digital hum of a forgotten corner of the internet, a niche online forum dedicated to the archaeology of childhood memory. The scene is set by a user named Mike Painter, who types out a question into the void, a hesitant probe into the past. His post is the spark. He asks if anyone else, specifically those who grew up in his region during the early 1970s, might recall a local children's television show called Candle Cove. His description is painted in the faded watercolors of nostalgia, a low-budget affair with a pirate theme, featuring a crew of crudely made puppets aboard a ship called the Laughingstock, captained by a cheerful, brave figure named Pirate Percy. He mentions the villain, a sinister puppet known as the Janitor, and a skeletal marionette sidekick named Horace Horrible. The tone is not one of fear, but of a faint, curious longing. It's the tone of someone trying to grasp a half-remembered dream, unsure if it was ever real at all. This initial post acts as a summoning. Slowly, other users begin to emerge from the digital woodwork. Their replies are tinged with relief and excitement. "Oh my God, I thought I was the only one," one types. "I've been trying to describe the janitor to people for years and they just look at me like I'm crazy," says another. The scene quickly builds a sense of community founded on a shared, fragile memory. It's a collective sigh of relief. They are not alone in remembering this bizarre, obscure piece of their childhood. The warm, nostalgic glow from the initial forum thread begins to cool and warp, like a film reel slowly catching fire. The conversation, once a cheerful reunion, shifts from whether the show existed to what the show actually contained. This scene is no longer about confirmation. It is an act of collective excavation, and with each new memory unearthed, the soil becomes darker and more foul. The users, now a loose-knit group of amateur archaeologists, begin to piece together the show's internal mythology. Their dialogue is a cascade of fragmented recollections, each one more unsettling than the last. Pirate Percy is no longer just a cheerful captain. He is a figure trapped in a world of palpable dread. His ship, the Laughingstock, is no longer a charming set, but a fragile vessel adrift in a sea of implied terror. The true shape of the horror begins to form with the detailed introduction of its central antagonist, the Janitor. He is not a cartoonish, mustache-twirling villain, but something far more visceral and wrong. Descriptions paint him as a grimy, malevolent puppet with a fixed, unpleasant expression whose role was less about swashbuckling rivalry and more about administering a kind of cruel, arbitrary punishment. His sidekick, Horace Horrible, a chattering skull marionette, is recalled not for comic relief, but for his jarring, clattering movements and a voice that was less funny and more unnerving. But the most significant and terrifying discovery of this scene is the introduction of the mythos within the mythos, the Skin Taker. This is not a character that appears on screen, but a legendary monster, a folktale whispered among the puppet crew of the Laughingstock. The users remember with a chilling clarity that the Janitor would threaten the other puppets with this entity. The Skin Taker was the ultimate threat, the thing that would get you if you misbehave. And its method was explicitly stated. It would take your skin. This revelation shifts the entire tone of the memory. What was once a merely weird or cheap show is now revealed to have a core of profound and grotesque horror. The subject matter, flaying, bodily violation, and an omnipresent, unseen monster, is entirely inappropriate for children. The users aren't just remembering a TV show, they are rediscovering a source of deep childhood anxiety that they had all collectively buried. The conversation becomes less celebratory and more hesitant, a series of, "Does anyone remember?" questions tinged with a dawning sense of unease. They are no longer just sharing memories, they are comparing scars, and they are beginning to realize that the wound went much deeper than any of them had ever admitted. The foundation of nostalgia has cracked, and a darkness is now seeping through. The unease cultivated in the previous scene blossoms into full-blown existential dread in this pivotal moment. The users have successfully reassembled the show's horrifying plot, but now they stumble upon a memory that challenges not just their recollection of a television program, but the very nature of their shared reality. The conversation turns from what they saw to how the adults in their lives reacted to it. A user, likely speaking for the first time, interjects with a hesitant observation. It's a small, offhand comment that lands with the force of a sledgehammer. "You know, I asked my mom about Candle Cove once. She said I was just watching static." This single statement acts like a key turning in a long, locked door. It is not just one isolated memory. It is a floodgate. Another user immediately agrees, recalling a nearly identical conversation with their own parent, who insisted the television screen was filled with nothing but chaotic gray noise and that awful, ear-splitting hiss. A third user chimes in, then a fourth. The pattern is undeniable and universally consistent. A terrifying new collective memory is forged. Not a single parent or adult in their town had ever seen or heard of Candle Cove. From the adult perspective, whenever the show was supposedly on the air, the television screen was devoid of any signal. The children were not watching a show. They were, according to all adult witnesses, sitting mesmerized before a wall of empty, roaring static. This revelation is the story's central paradigm-shattering twist. The horror instantly transcends the show's creepy content and becomes something far more profound and isolating. The users aren't just reminiscing about a scary show, they are confronting the possibility that they shared a mass hallucination. The safe, objective world where parents could distinguish reality from imagination is violently upended. The adults, the arbiters of what is real, were completely blind to this phenomenon. The children who watched Candle Cove were alone in the truest sense. They were having a shared experience that was utterly invisible and incomprehensible to the authority figures meant to protect them. This memory of the static creates a profound sense of isolation retroactively applied to their childhoods. It frames Candle Cove not as a broadcast, but as a transmission, a signal intended for a specific audience, a frequency only the young and vulnerable could receive. The question shifts from, "What was this show?" to the far more terrifying, "What was happening to us?" The static isn't just an absence of signal, it becomes a veil, hiding a monstrous truth from the adult world while simultaneously delivering it, clear as day, directly to the children. The forum's mood has now irrevocably shifted from nostalgic curiosity to a grim, almost forensic determination. The users are no longer simply remembering, they are testifying. The shared realization that their parents saw only static has severed their last connection to a rational explanation, and in its place blooms a need to confront the full, unvarnished horror of what they witnessed. This scene is a descent into a gallery of nightmares, each user contributing a specific, traumatic fragment to the whole. One user, their words likely typed with a trembling hand, recounts an episode devoid of any plot or adventure. They describe a scene where the puppet pirate Percy was suddenly gripped by an unseen terror. The camera, a cheap and unblinking eye, simply held on his face. For what felt like an eternity, a full 2 minutes of airtime, the cheerful captain did nothing but scream. It was a raw, uninterrupted wave of puppet panic, a shriek of pure terror with no cause and no resolution, broadcast directly into the living rooms of mesmerized children. Another user adds a darker piece, a memory of narrative cruelty. They recall an episode where one of the lesser puppet crewmates was deemed to have misbehaved. The janitor, in his grimy authority, passed sentence. The puppet was to be taken to meet the skin taker. The scene did not show the monster. Instead, the camera remained on the terrified faces of the remaining puppets as they listened to the unseen, off-screen sounds of their friend's demise, the desperate pleading suddenly cut short by a horrific, final scream. It was a lesson in fear, teaching its audience about the consequences of disobedience through implied, imaginative torture. Then comes the most psychologically unsettling memory of all. A user describes an episode that seemed to break down entirely, abandoning any pretense of a story. The characters, their puppet faces frozen in vacant expressions, simply stood or sat on the deck of the laughingstock. In a flat, monotonous, and repetitive chant, they spoke a single hypnotic phrase directly into the camera. "You have to go inside." Over and over and over, the line was repeated, a mantra with no context and no meaning, yet carrying an undeniable and sinister weight. It felt less like dialogue and more like a command, a piece of programming designed to burrow into a young mind. The atmosphere in the forum thread, already thick with a sense of unease, now curdles into something cold and grim. The users have been navigating the haunted halls of their own memories, but now a door swings open, revealing a direct corridor to a real-world tragedy. The abstract horror of a creepy television show violently collides with concrete, historical loss. The shift is initiated by Mike Painter, the thread's creator. His tone changes, the academic curiosity, the nostalgic longing, it all drains away, replaced by a raw, personal pain that has been simmering beneath his words all along. He reveals the true, somber reason for his search. His younger brother, Eddie, was one of the children who vanished in their town of Ironton during the exact period Candle Cove was allegedly on the air. For Mike, this is not a puzzle about a TV show. It is a decades-old wound that has never healed. He is not an archivist, he is a survivor, a grieving brother searching for answers in the only place that seems to remember anything, this digital gathering of fellow witnesses. His revelation acts like a catalyst, snapping other pieces into a horrifying alignment. Another user, perhaps the daughter of a local police officer, confirms the grim history. She recalls the tense atmosphere in town, the fear in every parent's eyes, the ongoing investigation that ultimately went nowhere. The timeline is undeniable, the correlation too precise to be coincidence. The festival, where everyone disappeared, was not an event on a calendar. It was a period of terror in Ironton, a season of loss where several local children were abducted and later found dead. And it happened simultaneously with the broadcast of this phantom show that only children could see. This connection transforms the story entirely. Candle Cove is no longer just a psychological oddity or a shared hallucination. It is now implicated as an active component in a series of real-world atrocities. The show's themes, the threats of being taken, the monstrous skin taker, cease to be fictional. They become a grotesque parody, a dark foreshadowing, or perhaps even a tool. The question is no longer, what was this show? But what role did it play? The most terrifying implication is that the show served as a grooming mechanism or a targeted lure. A predator, understanding that the show was invisible to adults, could have used its imagery and language to connect with and manipulate potential victims. The phrase, "you have to go inside," takes on a horrifying new literalism. The fictional monster and the real-life killer begin to merge in the user's minds, not as a supernatural being, but as a human monster who used a perverse and ingenious method to isolate and mark his prey. The users are no longer just remembering a show, they are staring into the abyss, realizing that the static-filled screen was a window and something monstrous was looking back, already selecting its next victim. The forum has become a chamber of horrors, each shared memory layering a new level of dread upon the last. The users are now adrift in the awful confluence of childhood terror and adult grief, the line between the fictional monster and the real-world predator all but erased. It is in this state of collective, shell-shocked revelation that the final, most devastating memory is unearthed. It does not just add to the horror, it recontextualizes all of it, providing a climax so perfect and so terrible that it feels less like a recollection and more like a long-buried truth finally breaking through to the surface. A user, perhaps the one who remembered the hypnotic chant, offers the last piece of the puzzle. They describe the final episode of Candle Cove they ever saw, the one that aired before the signal or the hallucination ceased forever. In this memory, the cheap sets and puppets are consumed not by a monster, but by the void itself. The ever-present static, the thing their parents saw, begins to invade the show's reality. It bleeds into the edges of the screen, swallowing the set of the laughingstock, engulfing the terrified puppets one by one as their screams are drowned out by the rising, deafening hiss. Amid this digital apocalypse, the villain, the janitor, is the last to remain. But he is not afraid. He turns from the devouring static and looks directly into the camera. He breaks the fourth wall completely, his puppet face addressing not his fictional world, but the very real child sitting alone in a dark living room. His words are not those of a scripted character. They are a declaration, a boast, and a threat, all in one. Now, all the children are gone. There's no one left to play with, except you. The line hangs in the digital air of the forum, its double meaning crashing down with the force of a guillotine. All the children are gone refers simultaneously to the fictional puppet crew being destroyed by the static and to the very real children of Ironton who have been murdered. The show is acknowledging its own role in the tragedy. The janitor's final statement, "Except you," is a direct targeting of the viewer, a promise that the horror is not over, that the viewer is now the sole object of his attention. But the memory does not end with the line. The user recalls the janitor's puppet arm reaching out, not towards another character, but through the television screen. He reaches through the wall of static, his gesture a grotesque pantomime of reaching out to grab the child watching at home. This is the ultimate violation. The last fragile barrier between the show and the living room is shattered. The memory confirms the most terrifying interpretation, that Candle Cove was not merely a broadcast about the killings, but was in some metaphysical way an extension of the killer's will. It was a mechanism for predation, and its final act was to announce its completion and to threaten the next child in line. The memory transforms the janitor from a creepy puppet into a timeless, terrifying entity, the literal embodiment of the predator's threat, reaching out of the past to forever haunt the memories of those who survive. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.